everybody. All right, so welcome everybody to this week's Fire Analytics SQL and Fire meeting. So today's agenda, it's pretty light, so we could have some open conversations. I just wanted to go through the to-do, and that's pretty much what I had. We could also go through some of the GitHub issues, but we might not want to do that live. And then any topics for other folks who want to discuss it. I know we have a bunch of people missing today. So I'm not going to go through all the to-dos except for relevant to folks who are here. So John, you had a ticket for create GitHub issue relating to the decimal number issue on Zulip. Did we get to that one?
Yep. So that one is a pull request. So it's waiting for someone to go look at it.
Okay. Yeah, I must have missed that one. Who's the appropriate reviewer or who?
Anyone really. I mean, I could just merge it, but generally we have a rule that we have at least one person that has a look at it. But it's really just there was incorrect test expectations that our sort of reference implementation is weirdly tolerant to. So I went through I found a few sort of things like that. We have tests that the reference implementation passes, but if you take a slightly stricter approach to the FHIR path parsing or whatever, it possibly doesn't pass. That's one of them, I think.
Yeah, I think that's broadly understood. So I don't want to volunteer you, Alex, but
Or which are we looking at again?
By the number.
So this one, maybe this isn't the decimal one. I think this decimal one actually has been resolved. There's another one that's waiting in there that's about type assertions. Okay, it is decimal type assertion, so maybe it is related. So this is number 226.
Alex will take a look at it. Yeah, I see it now. So I just get that off our plates. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, next Tuesday. So good stuff there. That should be an interesting discussion. In terms of agenda there, would it be possible for you, John, and Alex to coordinate on some agenda topics?
Yeah, sure. I think probably the first thing we should talk about is use cases. But yeah, we can certainly start up a Zulip thread and start collaborating on an agenda, I think.
Great. That'd be great. So Zulip thread for agenda, semi-formal review for me, semi-formal review process for spec and test. So I started just creating a spreadsheet with, some review items, columns. I'll work on that probably later this week. Nothing fancy, just a couple of columns so that people can sort of check off that they've looked at something. Maybe I don't think there's like a ton of urgency on that. That's something we can also do during the Connectathon, right? When we're there around that time. Sorry, at Glossary to Spec, I haven't done that yet. I did check that next week, Dan will be attending. So Dan Gottlieb will be attending the SQL on Fire on Parquet session. Also, vis-a-vis the Connectathon, I've been chatting with Sandy about getting a breakout room on Sunday afternoon for 20-ish people. She hasn't responded to my last email, but I think it should be possible that we should have a nice room or some kind of room at least, just to have some private space. I want to say probably an hour or two, a couple hours, and that way we should be able to we should have like an event in some sense, like a pretty casual event. So I want to just have one meeting point for that. That was before we're all in the Connectathon, so we're just not in a big room. And Graham, I also pinged Graham, so he should be able to make it once we have a time, and we'll tell Graham, be here at this time. I haven't heard from Graham in a couple of months probably now. Dan should be available as well. There was a couple of PRs out from Ryan, let's see, and I think from Bashir and Ryan. So, just a general ask to take a look at those. I don't think we have to go through them in detail. And then Bashir did publish test results, or I think it's close to publishing test results. So that's good. Alex, how's that going from your end?
I have not published anything. I ran into a couple hiccups with the reference keys. And since I'm using C++, it takes me a bit to actually get JSON working export wise. But other than that, I'm passing everything, which is good. So I just got to figure out how to upload it.
Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. Take a look at Bashir's PR, because I think that's the mechanism. And so if you kind of get the sense, I know there's some readmes and documentation about this. It's great. Two more implementations for the matrix in a couple of weeks. So it's really good. And just crossed my mind that next week during the Parquet session, Alex, we could have like a little demo of your
Sure. Yeah, certainly.
Of your work, maybe a little scalability. I won't.
Yeah, it's not much to show. I'll just show you that it works. I don't know. I'm able to get it to Parquet, and then I wrote a little script that puts it in a PG admin SQL database, and I could show that.
With the data, with the external data wrapper, or
Yeah, so I use DuckDB to load the Parquet file and connect to an existing server and just push all the data there. So, yep.
I think that might be obvious to some folks on the call, but like might be interesting for other folks to see that, and if you have any like other results.
Certainly. Yeah.
Great, awesome. So we're just churning through these. I think that's it for existing to do. Let's see if there's anything else on the agenda. Any questions on is it existing to dos or connected on logistics or anything?
Yeah, John, I was looking at your PR for the types, and I don't think we can say it should be a decimal because observation in R4 only has integer of it. Oh, maybe that's what it is. Yeah, I think part of it in FHIR numbers is changing the type from integer to decimal, but it's not one of the available value types for observation, which is the resource that we're using. Does that make sense?
So this is a range though, right?
The observation of value.
Yeah, but it's an observation value of type range. And then the range has a low and a high.
Right. Oh, I see what you mean. You're right. Yep, got it. My bad.
So I think the thing is like, yeah, so we've got this range which has a low and a high value, and they're supposed to be decimals. And then we're doing like arithmetic on it, like, adding two decimals or subtracting or multiplying, all of which should result in a decimal, right? I mean, if you
Right.
say it's an integer, like, is it sort of coercing? But we don't actually say that we can types in SQL and FHIR. We actually just say you need to declare it. If it's not right, you should throw an error. So
Yeah. No, that's right. In FHIR as well, there is some implicit conversions, but you can't go from a decimal to an integer. That's not allowed. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I think that's good then.
yeah, Bashir had a question about the FHIR version, because I think there was some discussion about like declaring possible FHIR versions in tests. And he sort of gave me this value set which showed that they are potentially valid FHIR versions. But I guess the concern I have is, are they a good enough FHIR version? Because, like there are, I guess there's releases and there's non-releases for starters. And I guess we probably only want to ever use releases. And if you were to use, say, like technically there could be differences between like point releases and all the rest of it. So possibly we want to maybe constrain it to be, a full FHIR version, but only a release version or something along those lines, just to get away from that edge case where you sort of specify some weird version that actually has different fields and stuff to the version you mean. But we can sort that out, I think. But I've just never really seen those sort of short, like abbreviated versions used in practice, possibly for that reason.
Yeah, I didn't look through it in detail. Maybe not the numeric versions, or
He's using just 4.0, but I think even the release R4 is 4.0.1, R4B, R5, that type of thing.
but yeah, I think it's probably some modification is needed to, Bashir's PR. That's my thought. All right. Well, that's all we had. It looks like I don't think we should just go through the tickets or anything like that or PRs. I think I don't think there's anything super urgent and they're sort of moving along. So yeah, if there's nothing else, I'm happy to close it off, or if we want to chat about any particular topic.
I had a bit of a chat with Ruben, who, for people who don't know, Ruben Daniels is like the deputy FHIR director. And he seemed to think that, and I sort of said to him that, we're interested in sort of socializing the specification more, but not necessarily entering the formal process of standard development until we're sort of happy we've got past a certain threshold in terms of the development of the spec. And he sort of agreed with all that. But he said one process that might be of value could be just the ballot for comment process. So we could, as a way of socializing and getting feedback on the spec from people sort of outside the group of people who attend these meetings, we could, advertise the fact that we're doing a ballot for comment potentially through or whatever, and get people who normally contribute through that sort of channel, through a more formal channel where they sort of review a spec and give items and all the rest of it, just as a way of getting in front of like those people and a different group of people, and getting some feedback that we might not have had before. So that might be a way of sort of engaging with the broader sort of HL7 community without actually, having to do a lot of formal process.
And then committing to that formal process. Yeah, I think that's interesting. Let's socialize that idea with the group and see what some of the other folks think about that as an option. But I mean, your point remains, right? Like, I think the amount of work we can do in our group is coming pretty quickly to a kind of milestone. And so those channels would be helpful. And I'm just thinking now, we could get Graham to advertise, right? You could start the kind of marketing push and say, hey, Graham. I mean, he does a wrap up speech at the Connectathon, but is there like any kind of intro at the Connectathon?
I'm not sure.
I don't think there is. Or we can just spam people on Hoover. We can become
the other thing
spammers.
is, like, we could just get added to the list of calls on HL7 without necessarily being part of a working group. So you know how you go onto HL7, you can see, oh, this is the calendar of all the calls that are going on. That could be another way of getting discoverability without necessarily having any of the downsides of the formal process.
I'd run that by Josh and Dan in particular. Not that I think it's a bad idea. It's that, like, I'm tiptoeing through these waters, right? It's the consensus of the group, but like, I don't know what the implications are. But
Yeah,
keep thinking about what different ways. But go ahead.
Yeah, but like the other thing is that I also asked about like FHIR.org, because as a home for, if we cut a version of this, where does it live? And a few other projects use that as sort of a publication place for like a milestone version. So that could be another thing. Like, once we get to this milestone, we could sort of cut a version of what we're doing and publish it to a place like, I don't know, onfire.fire.org or / whatever. So yeah, I was just talking about those sorts of things.
Okay. Yeah. And I know we have a domain that we currently bought, but yeah, I think that's also potential that's a possibility here, because I know I think our official designation is FHIR.org. Like, it's a FHIR community project, which sort of is centralized in FHIR.org. And so I think we're sort of like in under that tent for now, which I think is the appropriate way. So let's at least have this be a topic. I mean, this is a key topic, I think, at the Connected, but you're not going to be there. And so what's a good
So is that
way?
next week?
It is in 2 weeks. It's not next week. Yeah, it starts on the 17th. I don't want to exclude you, like, from these conversations either, John. So folks who are not going to be there. So let me think of like a decent way of, I mean, if we ever have a room, I'm happy to like start a live stream or something of it. Josh and Ryan and Nikolai and Graham, like at 2 p.m. on Sunday or something like that. Then I don't think we'll have a lot of those, but maybe one of those kind of like summit meeting kind of thing. Then I'll live stream it or record it. I'll definitely record it.
Yeah,
because
sounds fun.
Yeah, so so that we know what, so that other folks can know what people said or even interact. So let me make that a note for myself. Just be prepared to set up a live stream. Let's recording. Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a good next step. And if you think it makes sense, I think it might make sense to just open up Zulip threads on that topic of, where do we want sort of the canonical URL to live, and comment. Okay.
All right.
From the group? No? All good? Excited for next week. I think this will be a really great session. Yeah, folks are definitely interested. And Alex, we should bring in, I think I told Patrick about it too. So yeah, he's definitely interested. Maybe Patrick, Evan, since we're looking at this technology inside NCQA, we'll bring some more NCQA folks to the table.
Yeah, certainly. For the demo, I can just run my tool. I'll show like the input, run the tool, have it pop out something, and then show that it worked, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, you don't have to do a demo. I'm just kind of kidding.
Okay.
But if you do have interesting results, like scalability results, that might be something people would be interested in.
But yeah, I mean, I can post like the view definition I used and, what the data looks like. Because I think off the top of my head, I ran it, has like 15 different columns. I basically pulled out all the information from encounters over 70,000 patients, which was 4.7 gigabytes. I think it takes 1.7 seconds at the moment to grab all that data and spit it out. So, I mean, maybe I could get some benchmarks or something, but other than
Yeah,
that,
probably, and I can point you towards like a much larger data set as well if you want to
yeah,
give it a
certainly.
go. But the
Yeah.
other thing is perhaps more interesting than like the raw performance figures is like why are you using Parquet and what do you want to use those Parquet files for? Is it sort of like a read or optimized analytic repository type use case, or do you want to be able to sort of round trip the FHIR data? Do you want to be able to pass these Parquet files to someone else and them do something intelligent with it? You know, those sorts of things.
Yeah, that makes more sense. I think originally it's good for like compression purposes because I know internally we were having it's really slow to upload a bunch of data to certain sources online in the cloud, and you have to pay more for bigger sources or whatnot. So one is compression. Two, it's kind of an intermediate format for importing to various SQL tables, I think. And oh, what was the other thing? What you can do is you could read directly from a Parquet file rather than reading from JSON files. So say you have some engine, you have to just use the data, and it might be faster to read from a Parquet file and get, a whole column of values rather than reading from 1,000 JSON files or something. I don't know if I will, but I think other people at the company will, and CQA. So a couple different ideas there already.
Yeah, we definitely have, I would say, like Alex said, a couple of use cases that are determined by how our system, the quality measurement system works today, and the sort of real world experience of those. I have some ideas about it, but I wouldn't like want to kind of speak off the cuff, and then some of this might not be so open source, but so it's we'll have to think about that a little bit, but I think we could talk at a high level on some of these use cases because they're pretty obvious when you're trying to do quality measurement at large scale with hundreds of measures.
Systems easier with if you have like a lot of data. I haven't really thought about this as much, but I'm pretty sure you could have like multiple Parquet files or one table kind of spread over multiple files so you can send them in parallel easier. So maybe the Parquet file works in that tooling already. I'd have to look into that before I say anything concrete on it.
That's why it's used by Spark. So that's
Okay, yeah, that's what it is.
that's how the pathling implementation works. Is that Parquet is used for that in that you can run, say, a cluster of 10 machines, and each of those workers can sort of slice of the data that they're working on from a Parquet or partitioned Parquet data set. So that's the other thing, like, should implementations be tolerant to like partitioned Parquet, where it's not just like a single file, but it's like a directory of partitions of Parquet data, because that's also quite a common format.
Yeah, I believe, and you probably know this already, but for everybody, I think Parquet has chunks, like the column, but then you have data chunks. So I think what you mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you could have multiple machines and say you got chunk 1, you look at chunk 3 of this column and really distribute it that way. I think so.
Yeah, it's not exactly what I meant. Yeah, yes, there is chunks inside a Parquet file, but you can also have separate Parquet files, and you can say partition on like patient ID or encounter date or something like that. So it's very similar to partitioning in say a SQL database, really. It's like a shortcut, like based on a field or a set of fields, and structuring the data for that. And certain engines can take advantage of that. But there's all sorts of different ways of optimizing Parquet. I guess we want to figure out, what's the standards angle on all of this? Is there benefit in when you talked about Parquet as the input format? That's really, I think, where this discussion is at. So if we could have a sort of more lossless Parquet format, which we use for interchange for things like bulk data, how does that change the data lake or the data warehouse? Does it solve any problems? And, something that's more general purpose optimized for performance, and how does that relate to like use case specific view end of the spectrum where, we sort of run a SQL and FHIR view definition over it and just have the columns that we want. And that's sort of ultimate performance for like some particular use case specific query. But obviously it's not very useful getting FHIR back out or passing FHIR data around for general purposes and that sort of thing. So we've got all these sort of different potential ways of using the technology and sort of pathling, like we've sort of been, riding the fence on this and sort of trying to have some sort of representation that's very general and almost lossless, but still performant. But that's a real trade-off because you're never going to be as performant as a sort of use case specific approach. Does it actually need to be totally lossless? Do we want this to be like useful for interchange? So that's kind of it's a really interesting discussion there.
Yeah, you'd almost need like your FHIR path kind of queries the JSON, and you'd almost need an inverse FHIR path to like put it back from Parquet to JSON format. Yeah.
I mean, we may have a use case for it. Like, I think people will have use cases for it. But just going back to what you're saying, we've definitely started to look at the data strategy inside our application. And what you said definitely resonates in the sense that, like, let's just say that there's this technology, Parquet, with these kinds of transformations you can make on it, right? And where does that live? And there's almost even different flavors, right? Potentially within that, right? You have this sort of general purpose flavor, right? That you're saying, well, this is what we're using in Pathling, but even within this kind of, so in quality measurement engine or application like ours, you have storage use cases, you have computation use cases, you have caching use cases, and you have reporting use cases, right? And so you have a wide variety of use cases, and it's definitely not one size fits all. So I think this will be a really rich conversation around that. And I really like this direction because if there's definitely like better guidance here from the standards angle, right? Saying like, potentially here's a set of standards and guidance with them, then those decisions are going to become a lot easier for folks and they'll be able to make them quicker. And then Parquet as I would say, interoperable exchange format is another thing you were talking about. I think that's what, one of the things that Dan is interested in for bulk. So yeah, I think we'll definitely have a rich conversation around that, and we'll get some of our engineering folks to come on board and talk about these distinct use cases that we're starting to see.
Yeah, in some ways, I think that you don't necessarily need it's kind of that old paradigm in standards where it's kind of like you're lifting up the 80% and the remaining 20% fill in the details in your particular area. If we could have like a Parquet-based schema that's lossless, you can run a SQL and FHIR view over it. I think that actually would help a lot of people, even if that is not as performant as a more specialized representation, because what you can do is you can pass that data around. You can use SQL and FHIR view definitions to transform it to some more compact thing and then create your sort of use case specific solution off the top of that. So I kind of feel like we're going to end up more on the interoperable schema, sort of lossless round trip side of things for something that we could agree upon what that looks like, because we don't really need to agree upon all the use case specific stuff, because then what that does is it takes all the work out of dealing with the raw FHIR format and getting it to that use case specific thing, because you've got FHIR and you've got SQL and FHIR view runners that are standard tools on top of that. And that, I think that adds a huge amount of value. And then people can just focus on their particular problem within the tooling that they use. But that's just kind of my prediction.
I'm pretty much 100% on board with that in terms of a direction for us in some sense, right? Like start with the general lossless interoperable use case. Think about that for Parquet, and then which will be a great advantage. And plus we'll have sort of some unique requirements, right? If we're actually thinking about inverting that. And then sort of specify, standardize, align on that. And then I completely agree, like I'm not concerned. Like if your requirements require optimizing over beyond that level, then there's a phrase around this in user interface theory called commensurate effort, right? So it's totally fair to make a user work harder to do something that's also gives them more value and is rare, right? In kind of a general way. So it's a very similar idea. So if you were to sort of prioritize use cases, thinking about this group in Parquet, I completely agree. Thinking about that interoperable, lossless, like nested, formats at least, then you can apply VRunner. Then and that VRunner is now encoding your choices, and then you get the slim down, very high performance, minimal set that you need. So you're spending the extra effort to go that extra mile, because I think we'll get a huge amount of value in step one too, and I think a lot of people just stop there.
Yeah, I think the performance thing is important. And I think one of the questions is, does this solve some of the important performance problems that we're having within the FHIR community? And one of those is the whole bulk data thing, which is, it's really expensive to serialize huge amounts of data continuously into these bulk data formats. And then on the import side of things, which you've been sort of working on, Alex. So if we didn't need to do any serialization step at all, would that, or not serialization from JSON anyway, serialization from a more sort of database and analytic friendly format, would that solve some of the scalability problems on the import side as well? So, I'm interested in the implications of this for the bulk data ecosystem in general as well, So yeah. I've done a bit of thinking on it, and I'm keen to present some of my thoughts.
Awesome. Yeah, this will be a really fun one. Really fun conversation, I think, next week. All right. Good meeting everybody. So yeah, nice to have a small group. So next week, SQL on Fire on Parquet. So looking forward to seeing all of you there.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
See ya.
Have a good week.
See you next
ya.
week. Bye.